On the night of January 5, 2026, at 9:47 p.m. Tehran time, a single document leaked from encrypted lines appeared on the screens of Western defense experts. The time and words were ordinary, but the content was anything but. This document was not a war report or a threat analysis. What they read was a cold, clear, line-by-line evacuation plan. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who had ruled Iran with an iron fist for 36 years, surviving assassinations, wars, and popular uprisings, was thinking not of his country, but of a route to Moscow. The escape plan was officially ready. This is a story of a regime that was not defeated on the battlefield, but collapsed slowly from within. And in this story, the man at the top was no longer checking defense plans, but flight schedules. At the end of this narrative, you will see three major structural fractures, unprecedented in Iran, exploding simultaneously. And you will notice that this tremor in Tehran reverberated beyond its borders, from Beijing to Pyongyang. Because for the first time in modern history, a theocratic regime is beginning to crumble, not under external pressure, but under the weight of its own internal contradictions. These contradictions are so deep that even the president can no longer convincingly play his role. Stay with me. Let's start with the man in the middle, Pezeshkian. On December 28, 2025, the Iranian president stood before parliament and said something almost unheard of from the leader of a theocracy. If people are struggling to make ends meet, you cannot govern. They say raise salaries, but someone tell me where I'm supposed to find that money. This was not a rhetorical game. It was a moment of open retreat captured on camera. Pezeshkian was elected 6 months ago on promises of reform, economic revival, and better governance. Today, he is managing the worst economic collapse in modern Iranian history. The rial has lost more than 40% of its value in 12 months. A dollar that was 820,000 rials last January now trades at 1.46 million rials. This is not inflation, it is free fall. Official figures put inflation at 42%, but on supermarket shelves, it feels like 72%, and in hospitals, 50%. In his budget speech, Pezeshkian admitted that the government cannot increase salaries in line with inflation. While purchasing power fell by 42%, the increase offered to the public was only 20%. This is not policy. It is political mathematics doomed to failure. But what really makes this picture meaningful is this fact. Pezeshkian has almost no real authority. Iran is governed by a system where all final decisions, from the military to the judiciary, from the media to foreign policy, are concentrated in the hands of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. The president can speak, but he cannot decide. In March 2025, Pezeshkian said that the only realistic way to stabilize the economy was to lift sanctions and called for negotiations with Washington. Khamenei rejected this call. Pezeshkian also openly admitted that he had no authority on sanctions. According to the New York Times, some of his advisors suggested that he openly criticized the supreme leader's role. Pezeshkian did not do so, because such a step could mean not only the end of his presidency, but perhaps also the end of his freedom. Then came January 11, 2026. After nearly 2 weeks of nationwide protests, Pezeshkian appeared on state television. His tone had changed. The language of compromise was gone. He now accused the U.S. and Israel of being the forces behind the uprisings, labeling the protesters as rebels and terrorists trained by foreign powers. Those who attacked this country in the 12-day war are now ordering the destruction of these people, he said, calling on the people to take to the streets not against the regime, but to stand behind it. This is not a president standing with the people. This is a president who tried to play the role of reformer, failed, and is now reading the regime's script to save his position. And this paralysis, this obvious and undeniable weakness, is the regime's unique form of collapse. When even the system's civilian face admits it no longer works, the myth of authoritarian competence dissolves before our eyes. While Pezeshkian was assessing the damage, the streets had already begun to burn. On December 28, merchants in Tehran's Grand Bazaar, historically the most reliable voter base of the Islamic Republic of Iran, closed their shops and took to the streets. This was not a marginal movement. The bazaar is the economic and political heart of Iran. The merchant strike is a sign that the government's social contract has been broken. Within 48 hours, protests spread to Kermanshah, Shiraz, Yazd, Isfahan, Mashhad, Tabriz, and Hamadan. Students at Amirkabir, Sharif, and Tehran universities also joined the protest, chanting slogans that went far beyond the economy: death to the dictator, death to Khamenei, neither Gaza nor Lebanon, I give my life for Iran, Sayyid Ali will be overthrown this year. By January 10, protests had been recorded in all 31 provinces of the country, in at least 190 cities. This was no longer scattered anger, it was a mass uprising, albeit uncoordinated. The human rights activist news agency HRNA reported that 544 deaths among protesters had been confirmed, with 579 cases under investigation. This brings the potential death toll to 1,123. More than 10,600 people were arrested, including 169 children. However, these figures may be conservative. A doctor in Tehran told Time magazine that just 6 hospitals in the capital recorded the deaths of at least 217 protesters in one day, most of them from live ammunition. Iran International estimates that at least 2,000 people died in the 48 hours following the January 8 internet blackout. The regime's information blackout makes it nearly impossible to get a clear picture, but individual testimonies still matter. If you have any information on this, please share it in the comments. Security forces used live ammunition, batons, and tear gas. They raided hospitals. Yes, hospitals. A health center in the city of Malek Shahi in Elam was surrounded. Tear gas was used inside, and health workers treating the wounded were beaten. Even in harsh authoritarian states, there should be red zones like schools, mosques, and hospitals. If you cross those, you accept the panic. If you cross those, you weaken the moral authority that propaganda cannot revive. But what sets this wave apart from 2019 or 2022 is this: geographic reach, economic exhaustion, ideological rupture. The shift from demanding fix the system to end the system is the line between protest and pre-revolutionary moment. On January 8, Iran almost completely shut down the internet. The outage lasted over 84 hours and was the most severe blackout in the country's history. Despite this, Starlink terminals deployed by activists abroad allowed some images to leak out. Crowds, flames, slogans. The regime did not cut the internet to stop organization. It cut it to prevent the truth from being recorded. While Iran was burning in the streets, Washington was discussing figures, scenarios, and risk tables. On January 20, President Donald Trump shared the following message on Truth Social. If Iran, as usual, shoots and violently kills peaceful protesters, the United States will come to their aid. Our weapons are ready. We are ready to fire. On January 11, Trump told reporters aboard Air Force One, "We are taking this very seriously. The military is looking into it, and we are considering very strong options." On Tuesday, January 14, Trump is scheduled to receive a detailed briefing on possible options for intervention in Iran. According to CNN and the Wall Street Journal, the scenarios on the table include limited military strikes against Iranian security forces, cyber operations targeting military and civilian infrastructure, tougher sanctions targeting regime officials and the energy and banking sectors, expanding Starlink access to overcome information blackouts. Trump emphasized that no ground troops would be sent. However, he added, that doesn't mean we won't hit them very, very hard. Iran's response was immediate and clear. Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Khalibaf warned, if the U.S. takes military action, the occupied territories and all U.S. military and transport centers will be legitimate targets. This is a high-risk border policy. Trump hopes the threat of intervention will either force the regime to back down or embolden protesters enough to tip the balance. Iran, meanwhile, hopes threatening U.S. forces will deter action. But there is a third player in this game, the exiled crown prince and son of the last Shah, Reza Pahlavi. On January 8 and 9, Pahlavi called for coordinated nationwide protests at 8 p.m. local time. Millions responded to the call. Pahlavi urged protesters to take over and hold city centers and promised, "I will return to Iran soon." Whether you support the monarchy or not, Pahlavi has become a focal point, a much-needed specific name for this movement. Pro-monarchy slogans are now being heard in Tehran, Isfahan, and Tabriz. This gives the opposition something it lacked in the 2022 protests, a clear alternative narrative. Now we come to the document that marks the starting point of this story. On January 5th, the Times of London reported that Western intelligence agencies had obtained a secret protocol. Supreme Leader Khamenei had prepared an emergency plan to flee Iran from Moscow if security forces failed to suppress protests or began to defect. Dubbed Plan B, this plan covers Khamenei, his son and designated successor Mojtaba, and approximately 20 close aides and family members. The plan also includes the transfer of assets worth an estimated $95 billion held by semi-governmental charities and the Satad organization. The escape route uses the pre-secured Caspian corridor. This corridor provides a direct air bridge from Tehran to Russian military bases north of the Caspian Sea. This mirrors Bashar al-Assad's escape from Damascus to Moscow in December 2024 when rebels overthrew the regime in Syria. Assad is currently living a life of luxury in Russia and is reportedly refreshing his ophthalmology knowledge. Why does this matter? Because the existence of an escape plan fundamentally changes the calculations of everyone in the system. Every IRGC commander, every Basij volunteer, every mid-level bureaucrat is now asking, if the Supreme Leader has a plane waiting, why should I stay and fight? This brings what game theorists call the prisoner's dilemma to the security apparatus. The regime survives on the belief that the Supreme Leader will stay and die on Iranian soil if necessary, a messianic devotion to the revolution. But the evacuation list transforms him from a spiritual figure into a mortal politician controlling departures. This is an irreversible decision. Iranian analyst Beni Sabti told The Times that Khamenei chose Russia because he had nowhere else to go and admires Putin, and Iranian culture is closer to Russian culture. But there is also a darker implication. If Khamenei flees, he takes the regime's financial lifeline with him. The $95 billion in assets are not just his personal fortune, they fund the IRGC, the Basij and regional proxies. Without this money, the security apparatus collapses. The Islamic Republic has spent 47 years trying to create an image of divine permanence. The Moscow contingency plan shatters that illusion. Let's clarify what is really happening. Regime change does not occur due to a single factor. It occurs when three structural levers move simultaneously. The Iranian economy is not in trouble. It is experiencing a systemic collapse. The collapse of the real 42% inflation, water shortages, power cuts. The market traders who started this uprising are traditionally supporters of the regime. Their rebellion shows that even the economic base of the regime is being eroded. When the middle class cannot afford dairy products or beans, when a university professor cannot pay rent, the social contract becomes invalid. A video shot in Hamadan shows security forces opening fire on protesters one moment, then retreating the next, losing their will to fight in the face of numerical superiority. This hesitation is spreading. The regime has deployed IRGC, Basij militias, and regular police forces to 190 cities. This is not a show of force, but overreach. Every commander now faces a choice: suppress their own neighbors or quietly step aside. Reports indicate that some units have refused orders or deserted. If this trend accelerates, the regime's monopoly on violence will collapse, raiding hospitals, killing children, cutting off an entire nation from the internet. These are not the tactics of a confident government, but acts born of desperation. The regime has declared protesters enemies of God. This accusation carries the death penalty. But when you brand half your population as enemies, you are no longer governing, you are occupying. When all three levers move simultaneously, you are not witnessing a protest cycle, you are witnessing a transition. The question is, transition to what? This is not just Iran's story. Every authoritarian regime is watching and recalculating. Russia is watching the fall of a longtime ally and calculating the spillover effects on its buffer zones in the Caucasus and Central Asia. China is watching because it is dependent on Iranian oil, benefits from discounted prices due to sanctions, and fears losing an important economic partner. North Korea is watching because Iran's model of nuclear risk policy mixed with economic isolation is Pyongyang's game plan too. But most importantly, the people of these countries are watching, and they are learning that when fear ends before money does, regimes disintegrate most rapidly. What is happening in Tehran right now is a case study in how 21st century revolutions happen, not through military coups, but through the slow and grinding exposure of the system's internal contradictions until even the enforcers stop believing. If I were an IRGC general right now, I would ask myself, is loyalty to a man with an escape plan strategically sensible, or is it time to negotiate amnesty with the next leader? If I were a mid-level bureaucrat, I would quietly transfer my assets abroad and update my resume. And if I were an ordinary Iranian, I would calculate whether the risk of protesting outweighs the certainty of living under a system that can no longer feed, heat, or protect its people. Here's the final question, and I want to hear your answers in the comments. What happens to a regime ruled by fear when there are no more people willing to be afraid? Because when this equation is reversed, history doesn't ask for permission. It just moves forward. And right now, millions of people in Tehran, Isfahan, Tabriz, and 187 other cities are doing exactly that. They are moving forward.